She arrived at the office at 8:12 a.m., exactly the same way she had for 27 years. Same navy coat, same low black shoes, same quiet rhythm of footsteps that no one noticed anymore. Margaret Lewis carried a small cardboard box in her arms. Inside it were things that had survived longer than most people she'd worked with. A chipped mug with the company's old logo, a framed photo of her late husband she'd quietly taken down the night before, and a folded piece of paper with passwords she never trusted the system to remember for her. Today was supposed to be her last day. Tomorrow she would retire. That's what everyone thought. She passed the front desk, nodded politely to the security guard, and scanned her badge. The light turned green, same as always. A few co-workers were already at their desks, headphones in, coffee in hand, lives moving forward without noticing hers was about to stop. Margaret used to matter here. She remembered when the company only had 2 floors and a broken coffee machine that everyone joked about. She remembered when executives stopped by her desk to ask questions and actually waited for the answer. When files were paper. When mistakes had names. But time has a way of making people invisible. As the building grew taller and shinier, Margaret slowly faded into the background. She became reliable. Quiet. Low maintenance. The kind of employee people stopped seeing. At 9:07 a.m., her phone vibrated. A calendar notification she didn't recognize. HR meeting, conference room C. No description. No agenda. Just her name. She stared at the screen longer than necessary, then calmly locked it and stood up. She'd spent her entire career doing what was asked of her. This didn't feel any different. Not yet. Conference room C was cold, like it always was. The air conditioning hummed louder than it needed to. 3 people were already inside. Daniel Brooks from HR, a junior legal associate she'd never met, and Ethan Moore, her direct manager for the last 4 years. Ethan didn't look up when she entered. Daniel smiled too quickly. "Margaret, thank you for coming," he said, gesturing to a chair. She sat, placed her hands neatly on the table, and waited. Daniel cleared his throat. "I'll get straight to the point," he said. Margaret felt something shift, subtle but unmistakable. "Due to internal restructuring, your position has been eliminated." She blinked once. "I'm sorry," she asked. Ethan shifted in his seat. Still didn't look at her. Daniel continued, eyes scanning a printed page. "Effective immediately, your employment with the company will end today." The words hung in the air, heavier than they were supposed to be. Margaret took a breath. "But today is my last day anyway." Daniel nodded. "Yes, that's correct." She waited for the explanation. It didn't come. The junior legal associate finally spoke, voice careful. "This allows the company to adjust certain retirement obligations." Margaret understood instantly. They were firing her 1 day early to avoid paying what she was owed. 27 years, reduced to a line item. Daniel leaned forward slightly. "This isn't personal." That sentence hurt more than the firing. Margaret looked at Ethan. He stared at the table, jaw tight, hands clasped. She waited for something, an apology, a word, a glance. Nothing. The room seemed to expect a reaction. Tears. Anger. Pleading. Instead, Margaret nodded slowly. "I see," she said. Disappointment flickered across Daniel's face. Not because he felt bad, but because the moment wasn't dramatic enough. Margaret stood, smoothed her coat, picked up her purse. As she reached the door, she paused. "One question," she said calmly. Daniel looked relieved. "Of course. Do you still use the legacy compliance server?" The room froze. Daniel frowned. "Why do you ask?" She smiled politely. "Just curious." Then she left. What no one in that room understood was that Margaret Lewis hadn't been doing simple administrative work for years. She had been quietly maintaining systems no one else fully understood anymore. Old systems. Fragile systems. Systems that remembered things people preferred to forget. And as she walked back to her desk, knowing her badge would stop working soon, she realized something with perfect clarity. They didn't fire her because she was useless. They fired her because they thought she was. She returned to her desk without drawing attention. No one noticed at first. People rarely did anymore. Fingers moved across keyboards, coffee cups were refilled. Someone laughed softly near the windows. The office kept breathing, unaware that something vital had just been removed from its bloodstream. Margaret sat down slowly and placed her purse beside her chair. The cardboard box waited under her desk, already packed, already resigned to being carried out. She didn't touch it yet. Her computer screen was still awake. Unlocked. A small mercy. Or a mistake. She glanced at the clock in the corner of the monitor. 9:32 a.m. She had been fired 25 minutes ago. No escort. No announcement. No dramatic walk of shame. HR liked it that way. Quiet exits didn't disrupt productivity. Margaret opened her email. There were messages waiting. Routine ones. Requests that had come in before the meeting. A finance analyst asking for access to an archived report. An automated alert from a compliance tool no one checked anymore. A calendar reminder labeled simply, Final Review, 3 p.m. She stared at that one for a moment. They hadn't bothered to remove it. She closed the calendar. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, still steady. They had typed millions of words here over the years. Apologies. Explanations. Fixes no one ever knew she'd made. She opened a folder buried deep in the system. One that hadn't been accessed in over a decade. The legacy compliance server. It still responded. Slowly. Patiently. Like it had been waiting. Margaret leaned back slightly, eyes scanning the screen as lines of data populated. Logs. Audit trails. Timestamps. Names. Decisions frozen in time. She hadn't maintained this system because anyone asked her to. She had done it because she knew what happened when no one remembered how things worked. When knowledge left quietly, systems failed loudly. She had warned them once years ago, during a transition meeting no one attended except her and an intern who left 2 weeks later. She remembered the way the executive on the call had smiled distractedly and said, "We'll modernize eventually." Eventually never came. Instead, shortcuts did. Margaret clicked into a report labeled Deferred Adjustments. Her jaw tightened. The entries were exactly where she'd last seen them. Updated. Hidden. Relabeled just enough to avoid triggering automated flags. Retirement obligations quietly shifted. Employee classifications subtly altered. Not illegal on the surface. Just dishonest. She heard footsteps nearby and minimized the window instantly. Ethan walked past her desk without stopping. He didn't look at her. That hurt more than the meeting. She watched his reflection fade across the glass wall of a conference room and felt something settle inside her. Not anger. Not revenge. Resolve. Her inbox chimed again. This time it was an automated message. Your system access will be revoked at 12 p.m. 2.5 hours. More than enough time. Margaret opened a blank document and began typing notes, not for herself but for clarity. Dates. Cross-references. How one change led to another. How a restructuring quietly became a strategy. She didn't rush. She never rushed important work. Around her, the office shifted toward mid-morning. Chairs scraped. Someone microwaved leftovers too early. The world kept going. At 10:14 a.m., the finance analyst appeared at her desk. "Hey, Margaret," he said casually. "Did you see my request?" She looked up, offering the same gentle smile she'd worn for years. "I did." "Great. Need it today if possible." She nodded. "You'll have it." He thanked her and walked away, already typing a message on his phone. Margaret sent him the report 5 minutes later. Along with something else. A complete audit trail attached as a secondary file. Labeled clearly. Correctly. She stared at the sent message for a long moment before closing her email. One by one, she began doing what she'd always done best. Fixing things. Only this time, she wasn't fixing them for the company. At 11:47 a.m., her screen flickered. A warning notification appeared. System access terminating in 13 minutes. Margaret closed the legacy server last. Before she did, she copied one final file to a secure external drive and slipped it into the pocket of her coat. She shut down her computer calmly, stood, and finally lifted the cardboard box. As she walked toward the elevator, she passed the break room. Ethan stood inside, laughing quietly with someone from marketing. He didn't see her leave. At the front desk, the security guard nodded again. "Leaving early today?" he asked. "Yes," Margaret said gently. "I think so." The badge scanner flashed red when she tried it. Already disabled. The guard frowned, swiped his own card, and waved her through without another word. Outside, the air felt different. Cleaner. Sharper. Margaret stepped onto the sidewalk and didn't look back. By the time the company realized what she had left behind, it would be far too late. And for the first time in a very long while, Margaret Lewis felt perfectly, terrifyingly calm. She didn't sleep that night. Not on the jet. Not in the hotel overlooking the city lights. Not even when the room was perfectly quiet, the kind of quiet money buys. Because memory doesn't care how expensive your bed is. Morning came wrapped in glass and steel. The city outside the window looked sharp, efficient, powerful. Exactly the kind of place where mistakes were erased quickly, where people reinvented themselves without asking permission. She stood by the window for a long time, coffee untouched, watching people far below hurry to jobs that mattered to them. Today was the meeting. The boardroom was on the top floor. All white marble, smoked glass, and silence that felt engineered. Men and women in tailored suits sat spaced perfectly apart, tablets aligned, expressions neutral. Power didn't need to announce itself here. It simply waited. She walked in last. Not because she was late, because she wanted them to look up. And they did. Some recognized her immediately. Others frowned, searching their memory, flipping mental files. A few smiled politely, the kind of smile reserved for someone you assume is rich but irrelevant. She took her seat at the head of the table without asking. No one stopped her. The chairman cleared his throat. Before we begin, she raised one finger. Calm, controlled, the same way she'd learned to raise her hand as a child, even when no one called on her. Before you begin, she said, her voice low and steady, I'd like to clarify something. Every eye locked onto her. This acquisition, she continued, doesn't hinge on your approval. You're here to decide how much dignity you want to leave this room with. Silence. Not shocked silence. Calculating silence. She tapped the screen in front of her. The wall display lit up instantly. Stock trajectories. Internal emails. Compliance violations buried so deep, even the executives hadn't seen daylight touch them in years. Faces changed. One man leaned forward. How did you get access to? I built the back-end architecture your security still runs on, she replied. Under a shell company. 8 years ago. You paid my firm. You never asked who I was. A woman on the board narrowed her eyes. And what exactly do you want? That question always came eventually. It was almost comforting. She smiled, not wide, not cold. Just enough. I want you to listen. She stood, slow and deliberate, and walked to the window at the far end of the room. The city stretched endlessly, a reminder of scale, of systems, of how small individuals were supposed to feel. I was 12 years old, she began, not turning around, when a teacher failed me without reading my exam. Red ink. Big letter. Final. A few shifted in their seats. They hadn't expected this. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I went home and told my mother I was stupid. She didn't correct me. She just asked one question. Do you want to be right, or do you want to be unstoppable? She turned back to face them. That day, I learned something more valuable than any degree. Systems don't reward fairness. They reward leverage. No one interrupted. So I stopped asking to be seen. I learned how things actually worked. Who signed what? Who cut corners? Who smiled while burying other people's futures? She walked back to her seat. And today, I'm not here for revenge. Revenge is loud, sloppy, temporary. She folded her hands. I'm here for correction. The chairman swallowed. What kind of correction? The kind where this company funds a scholarship program, she said calmly, for students flagged as underperforming by automated or subjective evaluation. Independent review. Anonymous grading. No exceptions. A pause. And, she added, the program carries my name. One man scoffed before he could stop himself. You expect us to. She tapped the screen again. The scoff died mid-breath. Emails appeared. Dates. Names. Numbers with too many zeros. The kind of numbers that made regulators wake up sweating. I expect you to understand incentives, she said softly, and act accordingly. The vote took less than 3 minutes. Unanimous. Afterward, as assistants rushed in and lawyers whispered urgently, she gathered her things. No victory speech. No lingering. As she reached the door, a younger board member, early 30s, ambitious, nervous, spoke up. Can I ask you something? She paused. He hesitated. After everything, do you feel like you won? She considered the question. Then she shook her head. No, she said. I feel like I finished a sentence that was interrupted a long time ago. Outside, the hallway felt brighter. Her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. They found the old exam papers. Your teacher. The one who failed you. He's applying for a consultant role at a private academy. Thought you should know. She stared at the screen. Then she smiled. Not because of anger. Not because of satisfaction. But because the story wasn't done yet. Not even close. She didn't delete the message. She read it again in the elevator, again in the car, again while the city blurred past the window like a memory you can't quite shake. The name on the file attached to the message was unmistakable. Same spelling. Same middle initial. Time had added gray hair and a softer jawline, but authority aged differently than guilt. A private academy. Selective. Expensive. Proud of its standards. She laughed quietly. Not out loud. Just enough for herself. That evening, she skipped the gala she'd been expected to attend. The dress stayed on the hanger. The diamond earrings never left their box. Instead, she sat on the edge of the hotel bed in a plain sweater, laptop open, sleeves pushed up like she was about to do real work. The kind no one applauds. She didn't contact him directly. That would be too simple. Instead, she called Mara. Mara answered on the second ring. Please tell me you're not about to ruin someone's life tonight. I have yoga in the morning. I need a favor, she said. Mara sighed. That sentence has never ended well. Background check, she continued. Quiet. Deep. Teaching records. Complaints that went nowhere. Patterns. A pause. Keys clicking. Mara didn't ask why. She never did when the tone sounded like this. Give me 24 hours, Mara said. If there's dirt, it'll float. Thank you. And hey, Mara added gently, whatever this is, make sure you're doing it for the right reason. She closed the laptop and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. Right reason. That phrase had been weaponized against her whole life. Be quiet for the right reason. Don't complain for the right reason. Forgive for the right reason. She wasn't interested in being right anymore. She was interested in being precise. The academy interview was scheduled for Friday. She made sure she was on campus Thursday afternoon. Not as herself. No headlines. No assistants. No aura of power trailing behind her like perfume. Just a woman in neutral colors, hair pulled back, posture relaxed. The kind of person administrators ignored because they couldn't categorize her quickly. The campus was immaculate. Manicured lawns. Glass buildings. Inspirational quotes etched into stone, stripped of any real meaning by repetition. She sat in on a class. No one stopped her. He was there. Older, yes. More polished. His voice carried confidence, the kind that came from never having been questioned in rooms that mattered. He paced slowly as he spoke, hands clasped behind his back, projecting patience. She watched him interact with the students. Most were attentive, some bored. One girl near the window kept glancing down at her paper, erasing furiously. He stopped beside her desk. Struggling? He asked, voice smooth. The girl nodded, embarrassed. He glanced at her paper for less than a second. Less than a second. Then he shook his head. This isn't going to pass, he said, loud enough for the room to hear. You need to learn to prepare better. Her shoulders collapsed inward. Something in the room shifted. It was subtle. The air got heavier, like history repeating itself because no one bothered to interrupt. She stood. Not abruptly. Not angrily. Just stood. Excuse me, she said, calm but clear. On what basis did you decide that? Every head turned. He frowned. I'm sorry, who are you? She smiled politely. Someone who believes assessments should involve assessment. A ripple of suppressed reactions moved through the students. Interest. Relief. Fear. He straightened. This is my classroom. And that, she replied, is a student whose work you glanced at for under a second. A beat. He laughed softly. With experience, you don't need more. She nodded slowly. That's fascinating. Because studies show experienced evaluators are actually more prone to bias when they rely on intuition over process. Silence. She stepped closer to the girl's desk. May I? The girl hesitated, then slid the paper forward. She took her time reading it. Actually reading it. The solution was unconventional. Not wrong. Just not formatted the way he expected. She looked up. This is solid reasoning. She took a different path, but the logic holds. He stiffened. That's your opinion. No, she said gently. It's mathematics. A few students smiled. One boy actually exhaled in relief, like he'd been holding his breath all semester. She handed the paper back to the girl. Don't erase this. Ever. People will try to convince you that clarity only exists in one shape. The girl nodded, eyes shining. He cleared his throat. I think it's time you left. Of course, she said. One last thing. She turned to the class. If any of you are ever told you failed without being shown why, she said, that's not an evaluation. That's control. Learn the difference early. She walked out before anyone could stop her. By the time she reached the parking lot, her phone buzzed. Mara, you were right, Mara said without preamble. There's a pattern. Complaints dismissed. Students flagged as difficult. Parents pressured to withdraw quietly. She closed her eyes. Tomorrow's interview? She asked. Mara exhaled. Cancelled. Officially, they're reconsidering the position. Unofficially, someone high up made a call. She hung up and sat in the car for a long moment, hands resting on the steering wheel. It wasn't satisfaction she felt. It was alignment. That night she finally slept. Not because the past was gone, but because it no longer had unfinished business. And somewhere a system had been nudged, just enough, to remember that power, when unexamined, leaves fingerprints. She planned to follow them. All the way. The letter arrived 3 weeks later. Not an email. Not a call routed through assistants or lawyers. An actual letter, cream-colored envelope, careful handwriting. The kind people use when they want to look sincere instead of accountable. She recognized the style instantly. He was asking to meet. No apology yet. Just words like misunderstanding, decades ago context. The classics. The greatest hits of men who had survived long enough to believe survival meant innocence. She didn't respond. Instead, she did something far more dangerous. She spoke publicly, but not loudly. A long-form interview. No flashy platform. No viral soundbites. Just a conversation released quietly on a Sunday evening, when algorithms weren't hungry for outrage, but humans were scrolling with their guard down. She didn't name him. She didn't name the academy. She didn't even name herself at first. She told a story. About being failed without explanation. About being told her thinking was incorrect, because it didn't resemble the expected template. About how authority, when unchecked, doesn't just judge, it defines. And how those definitions can follow a person for decades. She spoke slowly, calmly. No tears. No anger. Just clarity. By Monday morning, educators were sharing it. By Tuesday, former students were adding their own stories in the comments. Different schools. Different countries. Same pattern. By Wednesday, a journalist connected the dots. The academy issued a statement. Vague. Defensive. Carefully worded by lawyers who had never sat in a classroom. And then the emails started coming in. Hundreds of them. Students. Parents. Teachers. Administrators who had stayed silent too long and were finally tired of carrying it alone. She read every single one. Not to relive the pain, but to map it. Patterns emerged. Not just individuals, but systems. Not just moments, but methods. That's when she announced the foundation. No dramatic launch. No glossy video. Just a mission statement that fit on one page. Independent review panels. Transparent evaluation standards. Protection for students who challenge outcomes without retaliation. And one line at the bottom, almost easy to miss. No decision without explanation. The academy tried to distance itself. Too late. An external audit was announced within the month. He resigned quietly. No headline. No scandal photo. Just a line buried in an education column. Stepping down to pursue other interests. She clipped it and placed it in a drawer. Not as a trophy. As a reminder. Months later, she received another message. This one was short. From the girl in the classroom. I kept the paper, it read. I applied to a different program. I got in. I just wanted you to know. She smiled. Not wide. Not triumphant. Just enough. Because this was never about revenge. It was about correction. About proving that a single moment of unjust authority doesn't have to be the final edit of someone's life. Some reversals are loud. Others are silent. But the most powerful ones? They change the direction of things so completely that no one can remember who was supposed to stay small in the first place. And she was just getting started. She thought it would slow down after that. That once the audit wrapped, once the headlines moved on, once people found a new villain to point at, the noise would fade and life would return to something quieter. She was wrong. The pushback didn't come from the academy anymore. They were done. Broken down into committees and apologies and lessons learned. The resistance came from somewhere else. Private messages. Anonymous emails. Polite at first. Then sharper. You're oversimplifying complex systems. You're encouraging students to question authority. You're creating unrealistic expectations. She'd seen that language before. It was the same tone that had stamped her work with failure decades earlier. Soft words hiding hard control. So she adjusted. She stopped responding emotionally. Stopped explaining herself to people who weren't actually confused. Instead, she started publishing data. Case studies. Before and after outcomes. Independent assessments showing how transparent evaluation improved not just fairness but performance. She let numbers do what feelings couldn't. That's when universities began reaching out quietly. Not press releases. Back channels. Pilot programs. Consultations. Off-the-record conversations with administrators who admitted, sometimes in whispers, that their systems were outdated, brittle, and built more on tradition than truth. She didn't shame them. She helped them rebuild. And slowly something shifted. Students started asking better questions, not louder ones. Teachers started documenting decisions more carefully. Grades came with explanations. Feedback came with substance. Authority didn't disappear. It matured. One afternoon, while reviewing a proposal, she noticed a familiar name. The girl from the classroom, now a graduate student, applying for a fellowship with the foundation. Her writing was sharp, calm, unafraid. In the final paragraph, she wrote, "I don't want to dismantle institutions. I want to make them honest." She approved it without hesitation. Months later, they met in person for the first time. No speeches, no dramatic moment. Just two people sitting across from each other, sharing coffee, talking about work. At one point, the girl hesitated, then asked, "Do you ever wish it hadn't happened?" That day. She thought for a moment. Then she said, "I wish it hadn't been necessary. But I don't wish it was erased. Because erasing it would erase everything that followed. The lives redirected. The systems corrected. The quiet courage that spread from one story told calmly into thousands of lives lived differently. Somewhere, a student challenged a grade and wasn't punished for it. Somewhere else, a teacher paused before dismissing a voice that didn't fit the template. No headlines tracked those moments. No thumbnails captured them. But they were happening. Every day. And that's how real reversals work. Not with explosions. Not with applause. But with a slow, undeniable shift in what people accept as normal. She didn't sit in first class anymore. She walked past it. And the world made room without asking her to explain why. Years passed. Not in a blur, not in silence, but in a steady rhythm she'd learned to trust. The kind of progress that doesn't announce itself, but shows up anyway, quietly rearranging the furniture of the world. The foundation grew, but never fast. That was intentional. Every new partnership went through layers of scrutiny. Every system was tested, broken, rebuilt, tested again. She refused to let it become another institution that forgot why it existed. She stayed mostly out of the spotlight. Not because she was afraid of it, but because she understood something most people don't. Visibility attracts noise, not truth. Still, her name began circulating in places she'd never expected. Policy discussions, educational reform panels, closed-door meetings where people spoke more honestly because there were no cameras. One afternoon, she was invited to observe an admissions review at a major university. Just observe. No commentary. She sat in the corner of the room as faculty members debated an applicant's file. Strong portfolio, unconventional background, gaps that didn't fit the template. A familiar tension crept into the room. Then something remarkable happened. One professor stopped the discussion and said, "Before we decide, can someone explain exactly why we'd reject this?" Silence. Not uncomfortable. Reflective. They went line by line. Assumptions were questioned. Language softened. Conclusions shifted. The student was accepted. No one looked at her. No one thanked her. They didn't need to. On the way out, a junior faculty member caught up to her in the hallway. "I just wanted you to know," he said quietly. 5 years ago, I wouldn't have spoken up like that." She nodded. "That's usually how change starts," she replied. Someone realizing they're allowed to pause. Later that evening, she boarded a flight home. Economy class. Window seat. As she settled in, a woman across the aisle kept glancing at her. Hesitating. Finally, she leaned over. "Sorry," the woman said, embarrassed. "This is strange, but you spoke at my daughter's university last year." She almost dropped out before that. She didn't ask what happened next. She didn't need to. The woman's voice cracked just enough to fill in the rest. "Thank you," she whispered. The plane took off. Outside the window, the city shrank into a grid of lights, orderly, distant, manageable. She thought about the girl in the classroom. The red mark. The quiet disbelief. She thought about how easily that moment could have ended everything. And how it didn't. Because the truth is, most lives don't change because of grand victories. They change because one unjust moment refuses to stay buried. Because someone decides not to internalize a verdict that was never fair. Because silence breaks, not into noise but into direction. She closed her eyes as the plane leveled out. Somewhere below, another student was sitting in a room, staring at a decision that felt final. It wasn't. It never was. And that, more than first-class seats, more than apologies, more than power, that was the real reversal. Silent, permanent, unstoppable.